Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Bayme, and in this episode, we sit down with Jonathan Bayme. Jonathan is an incredible person in the world of magic. He's had his hand in cookie jars like Illusionist. He's a founder of Theory 11. He has had a huge role in the explosion of playing cards, specifically the way that these designer cards are exciting for the public, because with Theory 11, he's launched cards with Darren Brown, with the Beatles, with Harry Potter, with Avengers, and so many others. James Bond. It's been absolutely incredible. He's worked with Dan White on so many of his things, from The Magician Online to The Magician at the Nomad to his late night show appearances. This man has his hand behind so many of the magic things that you know and love, and that I have known and loved for basically my whole entire magic career. This was an incredible interview with an incredible mind in the world of magic. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Here it is, a wonderful episode with the one and only Jonathan Bayme. Jonathan Bayme. Jonathan, how are you?
I know him. I'm great. Thank you for having me on this. I'm happy to chat.
Very excited to have you. You know, we have a segment at the end of the podcast where people recommend magicians who'd be great for the podcast. And you are one of the top names. You've actually come up a couple times in terms of a recommendation. So really pumped to have you. Let's maybe get started at the very beginning, which I'm sure you've answered in every way, shape, or form. But how did you get started in magic?
So I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. I no longer live there. I am in New York City recording this as we speak, but I started in magic when I was in Charleston, and I grew up there. My dad, in particular, my whole family, but my dad in particular, was a big theater buff and used to make me go to every single touring show that came through Charleston, South Carolina. So I've seen Cats like 15 times. I've seen Les Mis like 6 times. I can recite a lot of these shows. And not only did my dad make me go to those shows, but he was the dude that would like find out when the season ticket, sales would open at like the local performing arts center, like 9 a.m. on Wednesday, the 18th, whatever. And he would call that minute. So we always had front row center at every single thing. And he would make me go to these shows. And for the most part, I loved it. And then one time there was a touring show, and this was back when I was 5 or 6 years old, of this guy named David Copperfield. And he was coming through Charleston, South Carolina, and I did not want to go. I thought magic was really stupid and cheesy and hokey. I had only been exposed to like the clowns and birthday party sort of style, old school magicians, no disrespect. And I was not interested in that for whatever reason when I was 5 years old. And my dad forced me to go to this show. And I was instantly obsessed, as all listeners, I'm sure, that are hearing this were too. This is David Copperfield, Dreams and Nightmares, peak of his, world domination tours in the early 90s. And I was instantly obsessed. The issue was there was no real magic stores in Charleston, South Carolina to learn magic. So I had a hard time with it.
Got the VHS.
Yeah, there we go. He's showing up the illusion. I think that was even later.
Yeah, it was. It was a couple of years later, but part of that.
But I like this VHS, not even the DVDs. So you got the old school OG. And so I really did struggle with it for the first few years. I didn't know how to learn or where to start. There was a magic store in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is about a 90-minute drive from Charleston, where I grew up. And I used to force my parents to drive me to that magic store. There was a guy named Roman Lepre. If he's listening to this, that would be nuts. I haven't spoken to this guy in decades, maybe. And he was super helpful, as all brick and mortar magic store owners typically are, and guided me. I used to spend all my money at that store from when I was like 6 to 12 or 13. And then when I was 12 or 13, my parents got us a computer. And suddenly I had a Netscape or AOL or CompuServe internet account. And I had this eureka moment that maybe I could use this strange machine that makes funny noises, eon, eon, in our living room to connect with other magicians by virtue of the internet. And then chapter 2 through 27 of my life began.
Wow. So, interesting, like not interested in magic. David Copperfield started the whole thing off, and then, almost immediately, or as if, or at least part of the story, kind of the combination of magic and online, and that seemed to play a big role really early on. What was the I don't even know because it wasn't my time, but back then online on AOLs and stuff, how did you connect with people? Who do you connect with? Like
there were chat rooms. I was Magic 500, and then someone took my screen name. And then I was like, I don't know, I feel like J Magic B, whatever my like AOL screen name or something was back in the day. And there were chat rooms, and I was connecting. I had like magic friends online that I, had never seen because like YouTube wasn't around yet. So it wasn't like you could like share videos and FaceTime and Zoom like we're doing right now. So I struggled with it. And I should preface with, at that moment, and from the moment I saw David Copperfield, my goal was to be a famous magician. I wanted to be David Copperfield. I didn't want to be a famous magician. I wanted to be David Copperfield. So I had, just like you, all VHS tapes. I used to record the CBS specials every year. I could recite a lot of his shows. And I was doing shows myself. I started, my first theater show was when I was 12 years old. I rented out the local theater, which is called the Garden Theater. Now it is called Urban Outfitters because they condemned the theater and made it into an Urban Outfitters in Charleston, South Carolina. It's 500 seats. And I was this like, I'm still okay to cuss on this, like piece of shit, stubborn, naive, whippersnapper kid who was 12 years old. And I was like, I want to be a famous magician. So I needed to start doing theater shows. And at that point, I'd only done like shows for Cub Scouts for 50 people or 75 people at a time. And I was like, 50 people, 75 people, 500 people, what's the difference? It's the same thing. They all have the same eyeball, whatever. So I rented out this local theater, which I remember costs like $500 or something for the night. And I called the local newspapers and local television affiliates. And I was like this little whippersnapper kid. Like, I would like to go on your TV show and promote my magic tricks that I'm going to be doing at the Garden Theater on December 29th. This was 2001. Somehow I remember the date. And they let me on their TV shows. And please, no one ever Google this. And hopefully they don't show up. But I did those things. And somehow we sold out that show. It was $8 a ticket, 500 seats. So I made $4,000. And that was like, holy shit, I could do this. And keep in mind then my idol still was David Copperfield. And so a few years into that process, when I was around 12 or 13, David Copperfield was coming back through Charleston, South Carolina. And I, similar to you just held up, I had made a DVD of my show. I've only told this story a few times, but I love this story. I'd made a DVD of my show. And I wanted to give it to David Copperfield. I wanted him to give me notes or suggestions on how I can become a famous magician like him.
Maybe he would add you on AOL after you give him
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Maybe you can have me on AOL. We can talk and communicate that. And David Copperfield had a website then. It was like this fancy Flash animation website. So I remember I emailed someone through his website and I was like, is there any way I could like meet Mr. Copperfield after the show and give him a DVD of my show? And this person who was lovely, who ended up working for David Copperfield for 20 plus years thereafter, messaged me back, said, stay in your seat after the show and we'll do our best. So this, enterprising teenage kid with a iMac at the time, made a DVD of my show. I made an amaret case for it that looked a little bit similar to that case you just held up with like a white background and nice typography and stuff, full color print. And I'd made this DVD of my show poised to give it to my idol, David Copperfield. So my parents were like, all right, we're going to go to the show with you. I'm like, no. I've got a meeting with him after. You cannot go. And I went to this thing alone, the show, happens. It's amazing. I stay in my seat after the show and the person comes up to me and says, okay, so thank you so much for waiting. I don't know how much time David's going to have. He's touring. So he's got another show probably in Charlotte the next night because David's touring schedule was grueling. And they put me in this line of people, and the line of people is like the radio hosts in the city and everyone else. And David comes out and he's got his cell phone onto his ear and he's signing autographs and schmoozing with people and going down the line. And he's getting closer and closer and closer to me. And keep in mind, I'm like 13 years old here. So I'm freaking the hell out. I'm like, what do I do with my hands? What do I call him? David, Mr. Copperfield, what do I say? So I'm freaking out. And then when he comes up to me, before I can utter a syllable and give him this DVD of my show and tell him I want him to give me notes on it, he takes the DVD from me because I can't speak and he signs it thinking that it's his DVD sold in the lobby and gives it back to me and walks away. Now, I can't emphasize enough. I had this date circled on my calendar for maybe 6 months prior to this, of this was going to happen. So he walks away and I think I just failed. Like this was my moment. I've been looking for this for months.
On one hand, you got his signature, but on the other hand, you failed.
My mission, yes. So I was like heartbroken. And I remember walking out to the lobby of the theater. I can still see this in my head. And I like tears streaming down my face. I was 13, whatever. And I walked up to the first guy I saw that had a crew badge on. And I was like, excuse me, sir. My voice is probably 17 octaves higher. And do you work with the show? And this guy said, kind of, why? And I said, well, I'm a magician and I'm from here and I made this DVD of my show and I would love to give it to Mr. Copperfield and give him my advice and blah, blah, blah. That guy ends up being this guy named Chris Kenner. So Chris and I have spoken, if not every day, then at least like every week or so from that moment when I was 13 years old on. And Chris and I used to talk on the phone and he would give me advice and we used to email. And he was just an unbelievable support, network for me when I didn't know any of the magicians, and I would be able to ask him questions and get advice. I used to, back when David was starting to perform at the MGM in Vegas, Chris would sometimes call me on the way home from David's shows. David's shows, the MGM in Las Vegas, are usually around 6 and 9:30 or 7 and 9:30. The late show usually ends around 11:15, 11:17. That means that Chris is usually on the way home at around 11:30 at the time. And that meant that sometimes he would call me on the way home, which was 11:30 Pacific. And I was East Coast. So that was 2:30 in the morning in Charleston, South Carolina. So I used to set my little Nokia phone by my bed. I would set my alarm for about 10 minutes before then. So I would be awake and alert. And I had a notepad of questions and things I wanted his advice on, ready to go. And some nights, most nights, he didn't call me. But when he did, I was ready to go to get his advice and soak up as much as I can. And he was just unbelievably, and still is, like, supportive of the youth and magic. And that was just like exhibit A of how that started.
Wow. What a story. First of all, like, kind of an interesting moment. You get to meet David Copperfield and it's like, please, like, look at my stuff, like, please, like, I'd love for you to see what I'm doing. Yes. Which is so funny to reflect on. And also a great coincidence, that ended up putting you in contact with Chris. And, I love what you mentioned, setting the alarm for him to not call most nights just puts us in the position of, and I myself, remember being younger and having these magicians you idolize, you drive like 7 hours to like, hang out with them for like 12 minutes, all these like things that we would go through to be able to spend time with and chat with some of these magicians. So definitely that story resonates, especially with young people, and
he would give me advice. And I don't mean, and Chris still does this. And if you ask him, I don't know if he's been on this podcast yet, but he's, lovingly, but unfiltered in his advice. If you ask him for creative advice. So he wouldn't say like, I'd send him a video and he wouldn't say, it's really good, you're doing great work and keep up the great work. He would say, no, you need to move this downstage 20 feet because you could walk an elephant behind what you're currently doing. The lighting sucks and you need to change the music. And what are you wearing? He would give very specific, targeted, great advice that I still agree with now that I can remember some of it too. Of what I should do differently. And he still is like that. So it was like tough love, but also just unbelievably supportive. And of course, like I walked up to the right guy in the right place at the right time. And that's what started that. And then it was, if I can talk more about my performing career or lack thereof, but as I started to be more and more involved in Magic Online and working on Illusionist, which I started off in Illusionist being tech support and answering customer support messages, and left as president years and years later. But that was a fun side project for me when that began. I was doing things like that and doing things relating to Magic Online as a way of funding my trajectory to be the next most famous magician in the world. So it wasn't till, decades later where those things totally reversed.
Let's talk a little bit about the performing before we get into, the more to the online magic. First of all, did David ever end up seeing that video, that video?
Thank God he didn't. But no, he did not see the video. And I actually, one of the first times I met David and started working with him, I told him this story of that happening and him completely crushing this 12-year-old's like dreams and life. And his response, I think, was verbatim, I did that. And I was like, yeah, you did that. And he was like, and thought it was hilarious because it obviously came full circle and stuff. But I did have the opportunity to tell him the story, and he thought it was great.
So talk to me a little bit about the performing. At that point, you've kind of proven to yourself, with selling out a couple theaters, proven to yourself that you can do this thing, that there's something there that you can kind of do it. Talk to me a little bit about what were your steps back then? Like, what were you doing to perform? Were you liking it? Were you hating it? Like, what was it like?
I was naive and did not know what I was doing. I remember one of my favorite recollections of that first show I did was, again, I was fiercely independent. My parents were very supportive of my hobby and my passion for magic, but I was fiercely independent. And so I did not let my parents or anyone watch my rehearsals for that first big show, 500 people the next night. Finally, the day before, this is a terrible idea, by the way, to not let people give you great advice and feedback and stuff. But maybe I just didn't want to hear what they had to say. So I didn't let my parents see any of the rehearsals. And I remember the night before that show, I was 12 years old, 13 years old. This was December 29th, 2001. I let my parents into the rehearsal. And I said, here, again, really stubborn. I was like, stand here and you can watch. So I went into the rehearsal, started the whole thing. And I was going to, and I gave my dad one job. I said, can you just time it? Because I'm curious to see if I should go slower or faster, if everything's just right. So the intention was to do about an hour and 20 show, which can flex depending on the audience interaction. And I started the show, and I wasn't like flying through a rehearsal. Like you might just go through the motions. Then I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do this. I went like at speed and pretended like I was, the audience member. What are they going to say? And I did everything at speed. And then I'm like sweating, and I'm like sitting on the edge of the stage after. I was like, that felt great. Like if I can just do that tomorrow in front of real people in the seats instead of an empty theater, I am going to completely annihilate this audience. And then keep in mind, I was like, so I looked over to my dad in the audience, and I said, how long was that? It was like an hour and 10, felt like an hour and 15 region. That's what I'm trying to hit. Do I need to stretch it? And my dad says, that was 18 minutes.
Classic.
And I remember like completely like deer in the headlights, because the issue was I didn't know any more tricks. There was nothing else. I'd spent all my money on the stuff I had in that. So I realized in that moment, I have to learn by tomorrow how to perform this stuff and not how to present this stuff, and what the difference is between like engaging with the audience, talking to the audience, speaking on stage versus like reciting a script and as quickly as you can. And then you're going to do this, and I'm going to need you to cut the piles into 3 piles and whatever. So I had 24 hours to figure that out. I think the final show ended up being like around 57 minutes, but that meant that I stretched 18 minutes to 57 minutes in 24 hours. And it was unbelievably nerve wracking, but it got better from there. I took the money from that show and I invested that into buying more props and working on more things, and scenic design. I remember like working on, and like I learned how to like do my own lighting direction with intelligent lights and stuff, and figure that out by myself. So it added some production value to it. Again, I wouldn't wish seeing these early shows of mine on my worst enemy, but I was figuring out as I went. I was using my friends in middle school and high school as my stagehands and like my associates. I remember my friend Tyler, who was one of my closest friends growing up, was one of my stagehands. And backstage before like, one of my first 20 shows or something, he threw up in the stairwell backstage because he was so nervous before this show. And I was like, you're not even on stage, dude. Like no one even knows you're here. So we didn't know what we were doing. I was totally winging it and figuring things out, but it was trial by fire. And I think I'm a big believer today. Like obviously I regret lots of things about that situation, and not the best way to go about learning things perhaps. But I do think that I forced myself to go through the sucking phase of being really bad at something. And they say, you need 10,000 hours. You don't need 10,000 hours if they're on stage in front of thousands of people, that you're going to embarrass yourself and the stakes are way higher. So I just got that like being terrible thing out of my system at a really young age, and very publicly, unfortunately.
Now, unlike then, there's a lot of different paths for a magician. Then it was even, when I was a kid thinking about magic, it was almost impossible. You're like either a performing magician or that's basically it. That's basically all you could do. That was what I thought, and now as time goes on with the internet, there's consulting, there's help, there's support, there's, all these different things that you can do inside of the world of magic. And I think, maybe the decisions that you were going through of either doing things online, doing some magic related projects versus being a performing magician is something that a lot of people can relate to in this moment in time, that maybe didn't exist so much. Not a lot of people were dealing with that. So walk me through what you were feeling. Were you talk to me how you went from wanting to perform to maybe being absorbed in online and maybe even taking a step back from performing. What did that look like?
It was never an intentional decision. It was a lovingly, smooth, unconscious decision. My last show I ever did was February 12th, 2007, which was the same week that I stopped working at Illusionist and I resigned as president of that company. And then I was, doing both then. I was still performing while I was, working at Illusionist back in the day. One was funding the other thing. And I then went to work, obviously building Theory 11 over the months and months that followed that. And I had less time to devote to performing myself. So I was like, oh, it's just on hold for right now. And so I just kept at that. And then we got busier and then we started doing other things. And then I realized, one day that, oh, wait, all those same emotions and passions that I had for performing, I'm getting my fix for those things by way of all of these projects that we're working on. So just like you mentioned, Theory 11 produces magic shows now. We're involved in consulting projects on the highest level. We're able to do magic on television. We're creating products and instructional videos. And I'm also obsessed with design and printing and all that sort of stuff. So I get my fix for all of those things vicariously, I guess you would say, through all of the projects that we do. So I do not honestly have, and you will never see me, I'm willing to be in front of a camera or speak on stage, but I don't have any unfulfilled pit in my stomach or my heart for performing. I get the same fix. So like you just said, I absolutely agree with that. Magicians now, in my head at the time, you could either be a famous magician and survive that way and make a career out of it, or that was kind of it. So I was, this online thing I was working on was a fun side project, and maybe that was going to, help fund the other thing. But that was it. There was no other path. And even becoming a financially successful magician then was a very finite thing. You were going to be David Copperfield or David Blaine or other magicians. 10 magicians that are super famous and successful, or really not. And you were going to have to struggle and work really, really hard to make a living and a career out of it. And now, exactly what you just said, there's 27 paths to being very successful in magic. One of those is performing magic on stage. Also, when I was, starting off in that phase of my life, doing anything online in magic was frowned upon. Being a YouTube magician, or just doing magic online or just doing magic on television was frowned upon. And now I think it's significantly more respected, at least among my peers in magic, that you can be an incredible, adept, very talented, very respected magician who only, does magic on YouTube, or the Chris Ramseys of the world, where they have these massive audiences and they're doing really great content and appealing to magicians that way, or people that only really do television specials and occasionally do live shows. That's fine too. People that just consult and don't perform often on stage anymore. There's 27 flavors now of ways that you can be extremely successful, extremely happy and fulfilled in your magic career and your magic life. And you don't have to, be David Copperfield anymore to do that, which was a very narrow path.
Yeah, I think a lot of magicians in the last 20 years went through that thinking. Started as, I remember as a kid, people used to ask me if I wanted to do magic. And I remember vividly my answer being, these magicians, they have to like promote themselves. And like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to like make photo shoots and like, I don't want to do all that stuff. And then as time went on, like it didn't make any sense. Like that thought like didn't make sense. Like that's not what I had to do. Like it didn't make any sense. So it's funny. There's, like you said, there's literally 27 different ways, if not more ways, to be a part of the magic world without having to be a performing magician or try to be the best, try to, make it to Vegas, or something like that.
I also think that if I had succeeded in my original goals, I would not have been nearly as fulfilled and happy as I ended up being. Or now, or at least in this particular moment, I feel very fulfilled in all these things professionally that I get to work on. And I feel like I'd have myself personally, I'd be a little bit bored if I just did that one thing that I was doing when I was, 12 or 13 years old and pursuing that path. I love that, this weird niche that we live in now at Theory 11, I can pursue all these different passions and interests. So to me, it just reemphasizes the need to be open to kind of transitioning and kind of going with the wind a little bit, open to new opportunities. Every person that you meet, every contact that you meet can lead you down a different path. And in a different direction professionally and personally. So just being open to that stuff. I was a really aggressive networker and I was in the middle of nowhere. So I needed to meet other magicians and other people in the entertainment world. I still talk to a lot of these people, these mentors I had that I sought out when I was 14, 15 years old. And I used to email and ask for advice. I still talk to these people 2 decades later. So just shows the value of that. But all of these things have pushed me in different directions. And I was willing to go with the wind and let I wasn't so set on this original, like immutable dream that anything but that would be failure. I was subconsciously, I guess, willing to go with the flow and seeing where things landed. And there was no master plan involved in it. I was just following what I thought was exciting and one moment at a time.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that, wanting to, can't picture yourself doing anything else aside from magic, but not knowing exactly what it is, in the world of magic. And who knows, maybe soon, instead of 27 different ways, there'll be 58 different ways because you're doing magic in the metaverse or whatever,
100%.
Something like that. Before we go into Theory 11, talk to me a little bit about your time at Illusionist. What was that like? Especially, that must have been really the early days of Illusionist. And that was kind of the first, if I'm not mistaken, really like connection between magic online, selling tricks to the public. Like that was like the big one. Talk to me a little bit about your time there.
I started at Illusionist when I was 12 or so years old. I emailed the founder, who is named Brad Christian, and I gave him 37 unsolicited ideas of rambling nonsense, I'm sure, of all the things I thought they should be doing. And this was coming from a very authentic place because I was the target audience. I was the kid who didn't have any magicians around him that needed advice, that wanted to learn, that wanted to connect. And so I hit send on email of all the things I thought that they could and should be doing. As the one of, if not the only large magic website at that particular time. There were other things. There was Hinckley's Magic Factory, whatever, but those were not like cool in the sense that Illusionist was attempting to be at the time and really making great efforts to become. So I sent off this email, and I think, at least in my recollection, Brad very nicely wrote back, no, like these were not things they're immediately interested in or as a priority. So I did not know how anything works in business or life. So I took it upon myself. I made some of those things. I made, a message board, which I think was the first magic message board that was under the Illusionist umbrella. I put the Illusionist logo on it. And now I understand that you can't just do that with companies. You can't just, and I sent it back to Brad and said, look, I did it. It looks awesome, right? We should use this. This should be cool. And then he I think he saw it and it was like, oh, maybe we should, test the waters and do something like this. And that started this collaboration via email. Longer story short, I started working in tech support. I was doing customer support messages when people were buying VHS tapes, when Illusionist was releasing, the very first beginner content. At that time, Illusionist was enormously frowned upon by the magic community. Some of which I think Brad would agree were valid, creative, or valid, constructive criticism. And a lot of it was just fear from the older generation of magicians that anyone that's not learning from books and is learning from mentors in magic was not a real magician or wasn't taking magic seriously, and illusionists wasn't properly training them. And I was, and still am, a very fierce advocate of the very opposite of that I was this kid who wanted to learn properly, and I wanted to learn the history of magic. I wanted to learn how to properly perform magic and do these moves and how to be a better performer and how to know, I wanted all the things. I want to learn right. I just had no outlet for doing so. And the internet was obvious to me at the time, the best way to do that. And so I was a fierce advocate for illusionists then for those reasons. And the company grew enormously as David Blaine's success skyrocketed. Illusionist was heavily, marketing based on the image of street magic and lots of people across America and the world wanting to learn magic. So the company was growing wildly. And so then my title changed from tech support to, whatever, to creative consultant, to then creative executive, to then president. And I was befriending an incredible group of magicians in the process. Daniel Garcia, I've known since then. Wayne Houchin, Dan and Dave. So I was meeting these magic creators in the process. Obviously became aware that the magic consultants, magic creators have such enormous potential, and wanting to be a great vehicle for them to promote and publish their work and really produce things next level and get it out to a wider audience than has ever been possible in magic before. I remember the moment where we could start streaming videos on a product page. And this was high technology back then. There was a company that you had to spend thousands of dollars for a month. And all they would give you is a technology for 1 inch by 1 inch to autoplay a video on a web page. Thousands of dollars a month. So we did that and had that. And obviously magic is such a visual art form that was turning point, hugely successful. Now it's obvious, every magic website, Theory 11, Illusionist, Penguin Magic, everyone has videos and YouTubes and stuff on the website. But magic, in terms of instructional magic online, being able to showcase videos without you having to download, a 20-minute to download or hour-long download for a real player video or a QuickTime video or Windows Media video was a game changer. So that company was growing, enormously, and I left Illusionist on great terms when I was this was 2007. So however old I was then, 19, 20. And Theory 11 was founded 6 to 8 months later. August 31st, 2007 is when Theory 11 launched.
It's amazing, as you tell the story, part of me is thinking about, it's incredible you're working here, you're working there, you're doing these shows, and then it's you were 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, during this process. That's bonkers, no? For a company to say, you know what, you've sent us a bunch of emails, you're 13, come work for us. That would be great.
To be fair, I don't think that they knew how old I was. I think Brad's mentioned this before, but I have to check, but I don't think they knew how old I was when I started, because I would write well, I would punctuate properly, I had good grammar. I'm a total spelling Nazi, as everyone who knows me can attest. And so I don't think that they knew. And then once they didn't know, then it didn't matter. As long as it was legal, which it was in South Carolina, where I was working from at least, then it didn't matter because my work product was there. And obviously I was super hungry and passionate and aggressive. And it's all I ate, slept, drank, and breathed. I remember walking through the threshold of my high school doors, and my little Nokia phone and my BlackBerry would turn on, and my real day, my work day would start. And Illusionist had 20 employees at that point. This was a real company.
Wow.
And so it was super fun. And for me, it was obviously 0% inspired by the business or the financial aspect of it, although the company was doing really well. It was just an awesome, fun ride to be on and be a part of. And seeing the trajectory of that company skyrocket was just an awesome game. I ended up finishing high school 2 years early. I was just running, the company and was so focused on that. I think at some point I realized I was not going to be able to do a good job at two things at once, running a company who had real employees, real humans who had families and children and livelihoods that depend on success of this company.
Did you drop out or take extra courses, or how did it work?
So I went to a super strict a Catholic high school, although I am not Catholic. I was like one of the very few Jewish kids in this all Catholic high school in Charleston, South Carolina. I messaged the principal of the school and I said, hey, here's the situation. I'm working with this company. The company is growing enormously. There's a real, thing here. This is a unique opportunity for me to focus on this and push this forward. Is there anything I can do to finish school earlier? I don't want to deprioritize. I'm not disrespecting the importance of education. If anything, actually, this is me prioritizing it because I want to do this properly and not, be trying to lose focus or diminish my potential on either pursuit in school, letting that, slide, or in my work. And I said, there's time sensitivity to this. Is there anything I can do to work more? If I stay up till 4:00 in the morning, I'm willing to do it, take extra classes, get extra credits. The guy wrote me back, who was named David Held, who was the headmaster at the time, and said no. And so I wrote back again to him and I pleaded my case. And I said, this is just I realized you might not have done this before, but this was a unique opportunity. And I feel very passionate about this. I really need to do this. It's not a choice. It's sort of an obligation for me because I don't feel like one of these two things is going to slip if I don't figure out a way to, and have your help to me to do this. And then he wrote back again and he said they had one of the baseball players at the school had an offer from Major League Baseball to go play, and he wanted to finish early, and they told him that he could not finish early at the school. So there's no precedent for this. And as an institution of the Catholic Church, they don't have ability to change these sorts of precedents and rules willy-nilly, despite his sympathy for the unique particulars of my circumstance. So again, me being a stubborn piece of shit, I found the email address for the superintendent of Catholic schools in the state of South Carolina.
Wow.
Who was a nun named Sister something or other. I don't remember her name. And I sent her an email on appeal. And I remember getting called to the principal's office at like 3:00 in the afternoon on a Friday, unprovoked, unannounced. And I was never in trouble. I was trying to be a really good student. I had good grades. And I got called to the principal's office. And I remember rounding the corner right past like where the school nurse is. And I see inside the principal's office where I just got called to, I see the principal and I see this nun. And instantly I know that I am in deep shit because I was insubordinate, that I was disrespectful. The guy told me no twice. You have to respect people's authority. And I'm just like seeing this conversation fly by like the Matrix in slow motion. And I walk into the office and I sit down. And they tell me that they reviewed the circumstances and the particulars of my specific case, and they're not establishing a precedent for this, but they're willing to grant an exception for my case. So part of the deal was also that I was going to be an advocate for and participate in the fundraising for the school and do a show for them. So the last show I think I did, or one of the last shows I did, was a fundraiser for my old high school where we donated, I think, $50,000 to $60,000 to the high school, which was the proceeds from a big stage show that I did for them. And I am a high school graduate as a result.
Wow. You have a long history of wanting something, trying, getting rejected, and then figuring it out, 3, 6, 12 months later.
Yes, it's fun.
That is amazing. Okay, so now we're at the point of Theory 11 and the launch of that. Tell me about how that started. Obviously, 11 magicians. I know a little bit about it, but tell me a little bit more about how the whole thing came together.
It came together. There's the core team, that we started with. That we launched on August 31st, 2007. Because I couldn't afford to launch a week after that. This was an all-in bet for me. I sold everything. I spent everything. I had $430 in my bank account the night that we launched. I had sold my car. This was everything. So we launched when we launched because we had to launch the website then. We launched with a few products. I worked on this with our team. The original team was Wayne Houchin, Dana Hawking, who was a close friend, lifelong friend of Wayne's, a music producer, all around creative dude. Guy named John Raker, who still works on Theory 11. He's our director of development still. and a few other team members. We were a very small team when we started, and we only launched with, I think, 5 or 6 products, which is just as much as we could scratch together that were good. But, the vision was there that we wanted to be a boutique. We wanted to be very selective in what projects we choose to work on. I had certainly learned things that I wanted to try, and different approaches to things based on, my childhood experience, at Illusionist and such. And we were going to do things our own direction and hopefully not fall on our face. So we started then. We had this whole hype campaign, if you remember this, called What is Theory 11, which was this website where we had these cryptic videos with all these amazing magicians, and Dan and Chris Kenner and Wayne and anyone else, every week at 11 p.m. And then the website launched August 31st, 2007 at, I believe, 11 p.m. And I remember I had stayed awake coding this website with James from our team for 2 days before that. And the website launched. I saw orders coming in, so I knew the website was working. And then I went over to the futon in the garage, which I called my office at that moment, and passed the fuck out. And I think slept for like 12 hours and then woke back up. I was like, was that a dream, or did we actually do it? Oh my God, we actually did it. And then checked my BlackBerry, and it worked. So that was the start of it. And it was just a complete all-in bet. And I mean that financially, but I also mean that in terms of everything I learned up to that moment about design and video editing and making a website and features and all that stuff. I just poured into this and hoped for the best.
And, we just talked about all these different stories of you hitting a big roadblock and then figuring it out. But this sounds like it was kind of the opposite. You just put everything into it, and it actually worked, on the actual launch. Did you hit any big roadblocks starting out, or did you kind of get the ground running enough quickly that it felt like it was a success?
There were certainly roadblocks. Every day there's roadblocks. So I think, that what I've learned in the 15 years now since then is, there's just different types of problems as we've grown as a company. And now we work with all these incredible collaborators in Star Wars and J.J. Abrams and Neil Patrick Harris and Jimmy Fallon. And it's just different types of problems. That doesn't mean they're anything's easier. If anything, the scale and the platform that we're on right now means that we've got more problems and more fires to put out on a daily basis. But having dealt with a lot of those things and survived them when I was really young, I think gave me a tougher stomach, or willingness to not curl up in a fetal position as easily as maybe other people do, because I just went through that phase when I was younger. But certainly, yes, there's always issues and problems, and in magic also there's just constant sources of drama and who invented this trick, and this was actually first published here. So we had lots of growing pains like that when we were starting, and making sure we're doing crediting properly and the importance of that. And some of my biggest victories I consider in terms of the magic space are the friends that I've attracted and been able to uphold over those years. One of the earliest memories I have after Theory 11 launch, I moved to Las Vegas. I literally rented the house next door to Chris Kenner in Las Vegas when I was right after I left Illusionist, I guess, and lived there for 3 years. This is before any association with Copperfield. This was just to be in closer proximity to Chris, who was such a mentor and source of validation, I think, honestly, for me, because not that I wasn't getting encouragement from my family and stuff, but having this guy who was the guy behind the guy, of magic, gave me such confidence that I was doing something right, and I was, and I should continue to pursue this direction. So I remember running into often Jason England at Chris's house. He would have parties or late nights and things like that. And I didn't know Jason England, and he didn't know me. And Jason England, is a hardcore sleight of hand guy. I don't know if you've had him on the podcast before. Unbelievably knowledgeable. He's an encyclopedia, of the scale of Max Maven and guys like that, of just, that's page, 427 of this book, and knows so much about magic. And I don't think Jason at the time really understood the thirst and appetite for, and how many young magicians were eager to learn, and they wanted to learn properly. And so I remember many, many times bumping into Jason, trying to strike up a conversation. And then I think I was just a little whippersnapper kid in his eyes at the time, not in a bad way, but that was just the reality. I was this 17-year-old kid, and he was this very, older school magician. Not that he was old then, but he was old school magician in that he had learned from books, and his peers were all, unbelievably well read. And there was this little kid named Jonathan that wasn't any of those things, that was constantly asking him stuff. And somehow, definitely through Chris, we convinced Jason to start doing some videos, and with Theory 11. And I think Jason realized, without putting words in his mouth, that there's a huge audience of magicians out there, particularly young magicians, but not limited to that really do want to learn, and they care about magic history, and they care about crediting. They don't maybe want to listen to a hour-long podcast only about crediting, but they do want to learn where that trick came from, who invented it, what were they like, and where did this come from? How do you do this? How do you do a strike second deal properly? And what's the proper way to do a Greek deal? They want to learn these things, and they want to learn properly. They just need really good quality instruction, and they need mentorship. And if that's not possible in person, then maybe you can be that mentor to that person virtually. And so we did tons of videos with Jason following that. We did this whole thing, Foundations and Foundations 2, probably like 15 to 20 different videos that we've released since then. So that was the sort of things that I felt, early on were encouraging, because I was able to, get this guy, Jason, who didn't understand it at first, I think, what we were trying to accomplish. And then he became such an amazing partner and friend of mine in the years that followed since.
I have, obviously a ton of questions about Theory 11 now, but there's been a journey, obviously, from the beginning to now, not only through the projects that you've done, but also through, the identity that Theory 11 has taken online, especially in the world of, tons of now different magic online retailers and things like that. Is there anything specifically in the, the journey? Obviously, we're looking at many years, but is there anything in the journey that helped you decide, hey, this is what we are and this is what we're not?
Yes, there was some very specific moments where I think starting accidentally to expand the scope of what Theory 11 was, and working on television projects and film projects and consulting things, and then expanding that into live shows that we were producing. And we can talk about Dan White's show in New York. As we did more and more of those things, it meant that Theory 11 no longer, and certainly didn't have to release magic products to survive as a company. And especially then, and still now, anyone listening to this knows that maybe 1 out of 50 magic products that is released onto the magic marketplace is good, and worth buying. There's just so much you have to filter through to see what are the diamonds in the rough. And so much stuff is released every week, and what's good and what is, I know everyone's definition of what's good can change. I'm speaking on behalf of myself personally. I'd like 1 out of 50 things. So the ability for Theory 11 to exist as an entity that we don't, is a quality over quantity thing, where we'd rather go 4 months and not release anything than having to release something once a week, or 3 things a week, or 5 things a week. It's just a different, model. And it's not to say there's not something wrong with the approach of releasing tons of content. Spotify does it really well. They don't have a gatekeeper of your music's not good enough to be on Spotify. But, there certainly are record labels and things like that only, work with a select quantity of partners, and they work on projects that are really meaningful to them. So now I feel like Theory 11's in a very unique space where we only work on magic products. And maybe this is a good transition to the other stuff. We only work on magic products when we're really passionate about it, when we really feel good about it. We feel like we need this on our website. And we want to get this out there. We want to be the ones to usher this magic trick out into the magic world. And we don't do it because we have to. We do it because we want to.
And I think what you said is right. This is a great transition to talk about some of the amazing stuff that you guys are doing now. And for starters, the one that is really permeated past magicians is playing cards, and especially with some of these partnerships with things like Avengers, even recently like Beatles, the Grateful Dead, these are incredible partnerships that speak for themselves as being a jumping off from being something that's just for magicians to being something that can really connect with the public. Can you talk a little bit about playing cards and how that's been a part of your journey?
Absolutely. So playing cards were a delightful accident. We started guys playing with custom playing cards in terms of design and such at Illusionist. Illusionist released the deck that was called the Black Tiger decks, which they still sell, I believe, which is essentially like, take bicycle rider back design and invert it in Photoshop, which is sort of all that we knew how to do at the time. I was not a designer then, and put a tiger illustration on the front, and that was the deck, and that was it. And we put that out for Magicians, and it did phenomenally well. And did another deck at Illusionist that was Vipers and Tally-Hoes, also just different colors of existing artwork. So when Theory 11 was coming about, I said, I don't want to do that. And so we said, well, let's do stuff with all original art. So I started reaching out to different designers and befriending designers. Theory 11 launched a deck that was called Guardians. That was our very first all custom deck that had like a all custom back design and box design and ace of spades and jokers. And that's where it started. And I remember 2007 or 2008, I got an email that Maxim magazine, which I don't think exists anymore, but it used to be like a magazine that was like, had half naked ladies on the cover and dudes would read it. They were going to feature our playing cards as their editor's choice gift in the holiday season that year. And I was so excited. I was like, this is it. This is the big moment. We're going to, millions of people are going to see this, and we're going to sell bazillion units of these playing cards then. And then the magazine came out. It was like a 2-inch thing in the magazine. Maybe we sold an extra 100 decks as a result. And we had printed, by the way, tons of them in like the run up to this, which was the moment where I learned that press does not matter in and of itself. Press and PR like that matters in aggregate. So when we talk about Dan White's show and The Magician in New York in a second, but that's where I learned that one press story, your big break, is not going to be one TV thing on America's Got Talent. Your big break is not going to be one, maybe there's people who do one America's Got Talent performance and a singer or something, and that goes viral. Great. But for the most of the time, even a New York Times, even a Maxim magazine, even whatever, is not going to be a turnkey, moment for you. So we did those. And then it was just one thing after another. And I fell in love with printing and design and paper craft and letter pressing. And we had done a few more decks over the years that followed. And then I started seeing orders come through on our website from a guy named Jeffrey Abrams. And I was a huge fan of a different Abrams named J.J. Abrams at the time. And I was a huge fan of his specifically for similar reasons to why I was so inspired by Chris Kenner, in my younger years, which was that this was a guy of such accomplishment and legitimacy in the entertainment space that was talking about our little craft, our magic, and this was JJ in, when he had done his TED Talk, which was 15 or 10 years ago. And he was talking about the mystery box, the box that his grandfather got him when he was a kid that contained whatever it was from Tannen's Magic Store in New York, and that he keeps this box closed as a reminder to instill a sense of mystery and wonder in everything that he does and every project he does, from the smoke monsters of Lost to Cloverfield and beyond. So I remember seeing that TED Talk and watching it 10 times and saying, this is amazing that a guy like this is talking about magic. And it gave me even more confidence that we were on the right path. And I loved how JJ marketed based on mystery. He had a quote that, maybe there are times where mystery is more important than knowledge. And so a lot of how Theory 11 marketed itself early on was inspired by that. So seeing orders come through the website from this guy, Jeffrey Abrams, I was like, whoa, that's crazy. But there's probably more than one guy named Jeffrey Abrams or Jay Abrams in LA. LA is a big city, right? So I didn't think too much of it. And then I started seeing orders come through shipped to Bad Robot, which was his and still is his production company. And then I was like, holy shit, it's him. So again, my enterprising side of my brain, it's I have to find out how to meet this man. So through Chris Kenner, I had met a incredible cinematographer who you should also have on the program, if not already, named Larry Fong. And Larry Fong is a cinematographer who did the movie 300. He shot the pilot of Lost. He did Batman vs. Superman. He's done tons of incredible things and music videos and other things. And Larry and JJ are lifelong friends. And Larry sent an email. I think this is my recollection of this. He sent an email to JJ and copying me on it saying, you guys should meet. You're like the same person. You have the similar interests of magic and design and printing and papercraft. You should meet. And I think JJ replied to that, not realizing that I was on the email, and said, yeah, they make some cool stuff. Maybe I'll reach out. And then like 5 minutes later, I think JJ realized, oh shit, JB's on this email. And then, hi, I'm JJ. Great to meet you. Sorry, this is embarrassing. I would love to chat with you. And he said, let me know next time you're in LA. I would love to connect. So of course I lied. And I said, that's funny. I'm going to be in LA next Wednesday through Saturday. Completely made this up. And I would love to meet and chat more in person. He said next Wednesday morning sounds great. Again, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, wherever the hell I was at the moment. Booked a ticket, stayed at a hotel that is literally the closest hotel to JJ's office in Santa Monica because I wanted to be within walking distance. So in case there was traffic, I wanted to be able to literally walk 5 minutes to his office and be on time. And so we had this great introductory meeting. And at the end of the meeting, he said, let me know if there's ever anything specific that we, think we can work on together. I'm happy in all ears and whatever. So I said, actually, before you go, there's one more thing. So I had stayed up all night the night before with our team and recreated this whole new image for a new mystery box inspired by, the mystery box that he got from his grandfather at Tannen's when he was a kid, but certainly totally different. If you've seen the Theory 11 mystery box with JJ, it's made of 100-year-old reclaimed wood. It's locked with an iron combination lock on the front of it. It comes with a letter from JJ signed that tells you the story about his grandfather. And the last line of the letter says, the choice to open this box or not is yours. So it's sort of an homage to the original mystery box from Tannen's that he got, but it's totally different. Proceeds from this were donated to 826 National, which was a nonprofit organization that JJ and his wife work closely with that does creative writing classes in schools and workshops across the US. But this first meeting, I showed JJ all these sketches of all this shit that I had worked on the night before. And he's like, this is great, but I think you should maybe tweak this because this part looks a little weird to me. And I don't think we should do that. We should maybe, I would work on a different way to do that. And he starts giving me creative notes on it. So I said, oh yeah, this is great. Okay, cool. I'll get back to you. So immediately I went back to the hotel and immediately I started working with our team on the notes that he gave. And I emailed him that night around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And I said, hey, great to meet today. See attached. I worked on those ideas you mentioned and let me know if this looks better. Very short email, very easy to reply to, and hit send. And he wrote me back 5 minutes later. And so started this 1.5 year long email volley back and forth late at night. And this was the time he was writing The Force Awakens, the Star Wars movie. And this became just a fun passion project for us to both work on until it was done. This was never intended. I mean, we were going to release it and sell it, but this was 0%. I think hopefully is emerging as a recurring pattern here. 0% financially motivated. This was just super fun for him because he loves design and printing and stuff. And it was obviously enormously fun for me because I was able to work with this guy who I idolized. And then it was done. And then we released that. And then we did another version of that was like a black edition of those. And it sort of just started this massive snowball of doing those and then pivoting from those to, we were still doing lots of other different designs and citizens and artisans and voyagers and navigators and all the other archangels, monarchs, all of the playing cards we had done since then, and started this whole trajectory of working with Lucasfilm, working with Disney, working with Marvel. Everything that we do with them, we design whole cloth from scratch. So we're not taking Star Wars artwork and throwing it on playing cards, which has certainly been done before. We're not the first. We're spending 6 months a year working on these things from scratch. With the Beatles, we didn't take a single element from them except for their logo. And the first time I showed them the designs and stuff we had created, that was the first, the product was already done. We obviously get their approval and collaboration every step of the way. So it just snowballed into that. Through JJ is how I met Neil Patrick Harris, Neil Patrick Harris, I didn't intend to segue this, by the way, but let me know if you want me to keep going. But Neil, I saw on the guest list for opening night of Dan White's show in New York City. So Dan White and I have been friends since we were teenagers, and Dan was working for David Blaine as a creative consultant and a magic creator in his New York office. And through a multitude of a longer story that we probably don't have time to get into, Dan and I had the opportunity to create a show in New York City. So opening night of that show, I see Neil Patrick Harris on the guest list. My parents are there, super high pressure, opening night. So I went up to Neil and I said, "Hi, I'm Jonathan. I produce the show. Thanks for coming. It's our opening night. Sorry if it sucks. It's our opening night. We're working really hard on it. Hope you like it." And that started this friendship with Neil. And we've spoken every day since then. That was March of 2015. So Neil and I became very close friends, and that resulted in a lot of the projects that followed. As I think you're aware, but maybe listeners aren't, Neil Patrick Harris is a massive Magic fan before he became an actor in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Ruidoso. His original goal was to become a magician before Doogie Howser, before anything. He loves magic, former president of the Magic Castle, and just genuinely super passionate about magic. So we connected over lots of things, and that was just one of them.
Absolutely incredible story, and especially as it pertains to like this moment in time, it seems like every 3, 6, 12 months, or maybe even less, you guys release another partnership that is absolutely flabbergasting, and incredible. Just briefly on that, you mentioned, the beginning of this story was you guys, the deck of cards being featured in Maxim magazine and it not really playing that big of a role. But now, with all of these different partnerships, do you find that a lot more non-magicians, the general public, is really being attracted to these things? Or is it like the decks of cards and things like that? Has it really, permeated? Or is it still mostly magicians being excited about an Avengers deck, magicians being excited about a Beatles deck?
It's totally flipped, the opposite of that. Our Theory 11 playing cards now are sold full chain in Walgreens stores. It's 9,000 stores nationwide. We have a full shelf at Barnes & Noble stores across the U.S. We sell in Target stores across the US, and we haven't even announced it yet. But this past Monday, we started selling full chain in Walmart stores across the US. So there's, tens of thousands of stores or people. So the net effect of that, these are, of course, magicians use our playing cards. We make them, we are magicians. So we want to make them with the absolute top-notch specs and how they faro and spread and, all that stuff. And of course, all day I have playing cards in my hands. But the audience for these is certainly not limited to that. These are Star Wars fans, Marvel fans, James Bond fanatics, Jimmy Fallon's fans, and Beatles fanatics that are buying and collecting these cards. And it's a whole collector marketplace that exists, well beyond the scope of the Magic community. And we really do look at it as totally different vehicles or different divisions of our company. We do things for magicians, and we do things that are, for the playing card side of the company. We also expanded into making games and things like that recently too. We released this game with Neil that's called Box One.
So I was about to ask, let's talk a little bit about that. That was I got a chance to play that game, and I found it through Neil Patrick Harris, and, wherever it was along the game or along the whatever, I saw your name on the bottom, and I'm like, why is this guy the cause of everything that I've known in the last decade? It all comes back to you. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. How did that come about? How did that game, get put together?
So we started selling in Target stores our playing cards, and which, by the way, is a whole separate 30-minute story of Target saying no to us for over a decade, unreplied to emails, constant follow-ups, nothing. Took 10 years to convince them to give us a test in Target stores of our playing cards. They said if that test in 5% of their stores did well, which is 100 stores, that they would expand our stuff. Thankfully, that tested well. We launched full chain in Target, and it's done phenomenally great. Target says, we'd love for you guys to apply the design process and the attention to detail and sort of ingenuity. It's magic-minded thinking that we have in our playing cards which if you're not aware, like we have secret codes hidden in Theory 11 playing cards. In JJ's deck, there's a whole secret challenge. In Neil Patrick Harris's playing cards that we released, there's a whole secret thing that I'm not going to spoil for people listening to it, where you go down a whole rabbit hole. So Target said if you apply that same craftsmanship to games, which no one really does, at least not in mass market. Normally in a Target store, you have like crappy, without naming any names, games that are like made in China, lowest price possible, crappy materials, crappy design, and just trying to make a quick buck. So they said, what if you guys applied your process to that? So Neil and I started working on some things with a lot of other collaborators on the Theory 11 side, Rory Adams, Blake Voigt, who I work with on almost everything, and our whole rest of our team. And we started working or applying our magic-minded thinking to board games and things like that. So we did a first game that was called Amazed, which is still available, and that did really well. And the entire time, Neil would not shut up about this idea he was so passionate about of a game for one player. And so we go in to pitch this idea of a game for one player, and you've played it, right? So I don't want to ruin it for other people. You can go to box1game.com and play it. And it's a lot of secrets and stuff. So that's why I'm being intentionally vague about it. But we go in to pitch this to Target. And we're like, all right, it's a one player game. You play it and they're like, okay, but can you play it with other people? And we're like, yeah, you can, but like, we really want it to be like you alone. And that's like the whole thing, box one for one player. Like, okay, but can that player like do it again after? Like, no, you can't. So they didn't hate the idea, but they definitely were going along with the idea because Neil was so passionate about it, and they were just going to do it for him. And like, all right, dude, all right, if you're so excited about this, we're going to go with it. So we work on box one for a year and a half, one player game, which Target does not think is going to be a huge thing because it's a one player game that you can play one time. We finish the game and we start making it. And then there was, I don't know if anyone listening has heard of this, there's been a pandemic. And the pandemic happened, I'm joking. And suddenly everyone is at home, stuck inside. Your friends ain't coming over because it's not safe. And they're looking for stuff to do to occupy your time and your brain and your that. So we happened to release the game then, one player game that you can play by yourself in the start of the pandemic, which was incredibly fortuitous timing for the game, not for humanity. And it sort of skyrocketed from there. So box one is the highest reviewed, highest rated game ever released at Target. It's like 1,000 5-star reviews on Target's website, but we spent a crazy amount of time on this thing. So it represents like thousands of hours of time on the part of myself and Ty and Blake and Rory and everyone that touched this thing, and which is why it's as fun as it is and just different and fresh. And a lot of that goes back to magic-minded thinking, which is a term I'm sort of just throwing out. I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but it was like applying magic ingenuity of moments of surprise and delight and suspense and wonder of like, oh, whoop, didn't expect that to happen. And like some of the things inside box one, again, not to ruin it, like look like magic gimmicks because they were made by people that make magic gimmicks. So it's no coincidence. And that was really fun. It was a way of like using the magic parts of my brain in a way that it's not magic related, but it is magic inspired.
In talking about, that project and about the pandemic, I ended up playing that game. I don't know what I ended up doing first, but short succession playing that game and then attending The Magician Online. And it was very obvious that whoever planned this one, maybe had a role in planning that one. There was a lot of interesting overlaps. I didn't see anything coming. I think I ended up, watching The Magician Online second. So like I didn't know anything. Nothing was given away. But it was like, oh my gosh, there must be some relationship here. And that was in a time where a lot of people were throwing anything that would stick for virtual magic. Myself included, like we made a bunch of magic for virtual, but really we were just like, if it's interactive and people are having fun and it's magical, then like check, it's good. And I think that was one of the first virtual shows that I attended that it was like, holy crap. Like I was like fooled in my house, like this was really exciting. Can you talk a little bit about putting that project together?
So brief backstory for people unaware that had not seen what we did in New York. We launched this show in New York City, Dan White performing. It's in a intimate room at the Nomad Hotel, which was a 5-star hotel, super upscale space. This is where like uniquely, it was like an upscale hotel. This is where like Obama would stay when he was in New York, but also it was a cool hotel. So like Rihanna stayed there as well. So like having the cool and classy at once, that's like Nomad. It was amazing collaboration for us. And so Dan and I worked on this show with a lot of other amazing collaborators, Robert Smith and Blake Voigt and the whole team that was consulting on this for weeks and weeks and weeks. We're essentially living in the hotel, creating the show. Show launched in March of 2015. The whole goal was to do one show a week on Friday nights. Jimmy Fallon was in the audience randomly for one of our first nights of rehearsals, which I didn't tell Dan was happening. That's a separate story. And we did Tonight Show for the first time in April of whatever that was, 2015. And Dan's done the Tonight Show almost like every 90 days, except for the pandemic since then. So we're working on a new one right now. That will be the 13th or 14th appearance on the Tonight Show. Each of those, I feel like I develop 27 more gray hairs because it's such a incredible but very stressful experience. So the show scales up due to that Tonight Show success, from doing 2 shows a week, 1 show a week to 2 shows a week to 4 shows a week to 6 shows a week. The show becomes the #1 show in New York City. It's ranked higher than Hamilton on TripAdvisor if you're a theater fanatic like me in New York City. And tickets are selling out in 10 seconds or less, 2 months in advance for this fancy magic show. I'm also very good friends with Steve Cohen, who has done his show at the Waldorf. Now he's at the Palace. And, I really do credit him with inventing the model, not inventing, but really popularizing the sort of Hofzinser-esque model of doing magic in an intimate space for the most influential humans. And that's what the goal was here, but totally different style than what Steve's show is and was. So we start doing this and it skyrockets, becomes this big thing. So March 2020, Dan and I are at dinner and we're like, what's our next step? We've dominated this, show that we're already doing in New York. What can we do next after this? How can we make this bigger, better? Week later, we have to shut down the show. Pandemic happens. And I was super depressed. I don't want to speak for Dan, but we felt like we had built this thing up for 5 years and we're like poised to, whatever. I'm not sure every magician listening to this can attest to. The early start of the pandemic was really scary because you feel like every skill you've been practicing since you were a child is now completely worthless. And it's not like music where you can get by and you can really enjoy a song with great headphones like you're wearing right now. Anywhere. And you can still appreciate it. Magic, it's a social art form. It depends on interaction and you can't do that. And then the pandemic ends up not being 2 weeks like they told us it would. It ends up going on for 3 weeks and then 4 weeks and then 5 weeks and then 6 weeks and then everything's shut down. So we don't see any end in sight. And I had seen other magicians do virtual shows. I'm close friends with Justin Willman and I was talking early conversations with him about virtual shows and very skeptical of it. Can you make a virtual show in magic good and cool, or at least next level? Of course it can be good, but can you make it great? Can you make it feel as good or better than a in-person show? And that seems like no, because it's like saying, can you make a concert better on YouTube than it is to go see John Mayer in person at Madison Square Garden? No, you can't. It's impossible. It's meant to be done live. And I get that line of thinking because I had that thoughts. I was very skeptical. I was very cynical towards it. I did not believe in it. And then the pandemic kept going and it wasn't getting better. So then we thought, all right, we've got a team, a staff, that was running the show in New York. We got to figure out something. I don't want to have us and this entire team on our ass indefinitely. We got to creatively navigate this and find a way out. At that point, it became a little creative challenge. And so Dan and I started having these late night talks, which is what we did when we were starting the Nomad show, of how could you reverse engineer a virtual show? And we thought, well, the Nomad show in person is an expensive ticket. It's like $150 a ticket. So we're like, all right, how do you make a $150 ticket magic show online, not generate hate email of people thinking that they're ripped off and actually give good value? And once we posed that challenge to ourselves, everything else sort of fell into place, because then it was a puzzle. It was, how do you reverse that? And we had seen other magicians. We were not the first to like send something to someone, when before the show. We thought, or maybe there's more to that than just including things. How can we use sort of the thinking along the lines of box one, which was what you were alluding to a second ago, of having moments of surprise inside that box that you get before show. So the way it works is you receive, this fancy box in the mail a few days before the show. We tell you strict instructions, don't open it until showtime. And then throughout the show, you're utilizing the objects in that box to actively participate in the show. And we remade an entire show that was purpose built to be done online. So it feels, if anything, more interactive than the physical show that we had done before that, and just different. And it felt really weird for the first while. And then we just slowly got into a groove of it, and it felt different, but really fun. And we were engaging in tons of people, and it was becoming a big thing. And we had more and more influential humans come and experience this. So we had the President Clinton and Hillary Clinton 3 times. We had Ariana Grande 3 times, and Jessica Alba and Ashton Kutcher and Chris Rock and JJ Abrams. And like the list got crazier and crazier, and everyone was sort of stuck inside, not having anything to do in the middle of the pandemic. And so our little virtual show became one of the things, and we were totally winging it. If you look at the room that we were broadcasting from, then it was like a wilderness of wires and HDMI cables. And, I went to Dan's house and tried to help set everything up and the cameras and stuff. But this was like, we were figuring out, what is OBS and what is Ecamm and which one should we use? And what's the best cameras to make the video look good? And what kind of lights do we were using the knowledge of production, of course, that we had from Theory 11 products, but we knew nothing about live streaming and all of that jazz. And so having to learn as we went, and it just ended up being a really fun creative challenge. And we're still doing tons of those shows. So it's running every weekend still.
It's an awesome project, and I'm glad it's still going on, and definitely, like you said, it was an incredible experience, virtual or otherwise. It was an incredible experience. And I've got mementos, I've got all these different things from the show that make it so obviously worth, whatever, how much, $100, $200, so obviously worth, what the show was all about. So, really, really incredible project. I'd love to know a little bit more about the consulting. That seems like something that has come apart almost, by happenstance, but, it seems like part of what your job is every day is magical thinking on different projects. It could be a puzzle. It could be a show. It could be, going on the Tonight Show. It could be, helping magicians with their projects. So talk to me a little bit about consulting and maybe some highlights from the magic consulting that you've been doing for the last 20 years.
So one of the first projects we did, which was what led to the Nomad show even existing, was I got a random email from a guy named Will Gadara. And Will Gadara was the co-founder or the operator of a restaurant in New York City called 11 Madison Park, which at the time was the #1 rated restaurant in the world, San Pellegrino, multiple years running. This was like the top of the top of the top of the echelon in the restaurant and food space. And I say that because I know nothing about the hospitality food space. I'm not a foodie. I survive on, a mixture of Chipotle and Outback Steakhouse. I'm not a fancy foodie at all. So I get an email from this guy, and he says he wants to meet with me in New York. So I, grab a bunch of our playing cards and I stuff them in my pockets, and I go to this meeting because we had done lots of playing cards for different hotels and restaurants up to that point. So I think this is just another meeting to talk about a different, collaboration. And I go to the meeting and I put 6 decks of cards on the table, and the guy's like, "Hi, I'm Will. Great to connect with you. Why do you bring 6 decks of cards to the meeting?" I'm like, "Oh, I thought we were talking about that." He's like, "Nope." So 11 Madison Park as a restaurant is very influenced, or it was at the time, based on the story. It was the ultimate experience. Like that, you walk in the door, they have a person on staff called the Dreamweaver, whose whole job is to really make sure your experience there is next level. They want to know everything about you, similar to like magicians will do, research in advance on an audience and know as much as possible about your audience in advance. They're a restaurant that applies that magic thinking to every person that walks in the door, which is insane. And the reviews and stuff speak for itself, and their reputation is a result. So they bring us in and they say that they want us to not create magic tricks for them, but they want to make their dining experience more magical. They want to instill more moments of mystery and wonder and surprise and delight throughout the dining experience. So we say, that's cool. So we started meeting with them and working on presentation ideas and such with the 11 Madison Park team. And we were training the waiters. This is Dan White and I doing this stuff. And it was the same guy that was the founder of the Nomad, and which was being built across the Madison Square Park at the time. So that's what led to that. So every project's different. We never know going into it, consulting, what it is. Are we consulting on magic tricks? Are we teaching someone how to do a magic trick for a scene in a movie or a TV show? Are we working with a restaurant? We spent 3 months in the middle of the pandemic working on a live immersive experience for Elf on the Shelf, which sounds ridiculous when I just heard the words coming out of my mouth, but that was a thing. And it wasn't magic tricks. It was more magical based things of Elf on the Shelf. We worked on, immersive theater, which I'm obsessed with, and experiential stuff. We've worked on installations, obviously Dan's show. Every project's different. And usually one project has beget another. So one project will lead to this, and it's the same creative director or art director that's working on this project who got our name from this guy. So it has been a lot of that, one thing leading to the other. One fun one was we did a Facebook live Halloween event that Neil hosted, where it was a live haunted house that was being streamed on Facebook. And you could make decisions of whether these people would go left or right or straight, as they're going through a haunted house. And Neil was sort of narrating it like Ashton Kutcher on Punk'd style thing. So every project's been different. We've done crazy stuff of car appearances for whatever, and we've done small things, and we've done hand doubling. Obviously, one of the most high profile things that we've done is our work on the Now You See Me film series. Now You See Me 1 was mostly, Keith Barry and David Kwong working on. We were brought on pretty late in the game on that. Now You See Me 2 was Theory 11, primarily consulting and training the cast, and Daniel Radcliffe, Dave Franco, Morgan Freeman, Isla Fisher, Michael Caine, and teaching them magic. We had a thing that was called Magic Camp for 2 weeks, where we would teach the cast magic tricks and have them perform on each other, because we wanted them, some of the stuff that they actually, techniques they used in the films, but a lot of it they didn't. We just wanted them to authentically have the experience of what it feels like to perform a magic trick.
Get the beats, the rhythm,
Yes. I just want them to get in the head of the characters that they're playing, the most famous magicians in the world, so that theoretically they should know what it feels like to perform a magic trick for someone and crush it, and have a spectator freak out and have an amazing reaction. And I also wanted them to feel the nerves of what it feels like to practice a trick and perform it for the first time. So, that was Blake and Andre from our crew that were spending weeks and weeks of time in London teaching the cast. And I can't talk too much about it, but for the past year and a half, we've been working on Now You See Me 3. And this one's unique in that it's Eric Singer is a writer. He wrote American Hustle, Academy Award nominated writer. If you haven't seen American Hustle, watch it. It's awesome. And we've been involved in that from day one of the script. So traditionally, the way it worked in magic consulting is usually they'll have the script and then they'll say oh yeah, there's 3 spots here where a magic trick needs to happen. Can you come and do that? And this was unique and so refreshing in that we were involved from the script stage of storytelling. So instead of filling in those blanks later, which doesn't feel like, it feels like, what's the word for it? It feels like, what's the game where you fill in the blank of Mad Libs of magic? Yeah. That's not the right way to have good magic on television or in movies, to fill in the blank with insert awesome magic trick here. So we wanted the magic in Now You See Me 3 to be purposeful and we're doing this piece of magic for a reason, because later it gets circled back to in the story, and having that conversation so early on has been a game changer. But I can't talk too much more about it because that movie is not out yet and it's still very deeply in the works, but that's been fun too. And that's certainly, a very high profile one that we've been able to be a part of.
And to go full circle from, mentioning at the beginning, I know you ended up doing some work with David Copperfield. Can you talk a little bit about what that was?
I met David after many, many years of being friends with Chris. There was a specific project that Copperfield was working on. And David had asked Chris how they can execute this project. And Chris was like, I know who you need to talk to, and connected us on the phone. And I remember I was on a cruise ship with my parents in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean. I got a call at 3:00 in the morning from Chris on my little cell phone, because I had a little international phone because I was traveling. And it wasn't unusual that Chris called me 3:00 in the morning because that's who we are. And so I pick up and Chris goes, hey, you busy? I'm like, nope, I'm good. What's up? He's like, David wants to talk to you. Working on a project. Hold on one second. And he puts David on the phone. And immediately my phone service goes to shit. And so he's breaking up. So the first time I'm ever speaking to David Copperfield after now you understand my history of idolizing this man. This is what I hear. Every other word is what I'm hearing. And I'm like, this is the worst thing that's happened. Like, what can I do? So I close the phone. I literally hang up on David Copperfield. I run down to the little office area on the Norwegian cruise lines that we were on. I said, do you guys have like a landline phone or like something like a satellite phone that I can use? And David Copperfield's calling me. I probably sounded like I was on drugs in the middle of the night down this place. And they let me use their landline at like the cruise ship thing. So I called Chris back on that. And that was the first time David and I spoke on a specific project. And we've absolutely spoken every week since then. We became very good friends and collaborate on lots of stuff. I write things, generally consult on things, and do a lot of other secret shit that I can't talk about. But that's awesome and super fulfilling because for me, everything came full circle. It started with that. And so now being able to do things, David and I clicked very easily because he realized early on that I'd studied his work so closely that I could write very well in his voice because I know, every day for as long as I can remember, I've done the same thing, whether I'm at home in all these, like the script you can recite from his television specials and such. I knew because I had been a fanatic. So that made our collaboration really easy. He had, similar stories. David's from Metuchen, New Jersey, comes from a small town, overcame lots of obstacles and stuff like that to be who he is today. And his work ethic is unbelievable, which is no surprise to anyone listening to this. So it's still super inspiring to me today to keep up with him. There's often times where we'll work on a project and be talking about something at 11 o'clock at night. And then we'll hang up and then I'll, get a text from him at like 7 a.m. the next morning. Hey, what's the latest on that stuff we were talking about last night? The latest is that we slept and now we're talking again. Like, oh, I woke up this morning and I couldn't stop thinking about this. And I figured out a solution to this. And I sent you an email with a bunch, like he's still that aggressive and prolific and obviously loves what he does. So seeing that, still today is super inspiring to me.
Do you have a favorite, there's so many projects that you've got a chance to put your magical thinking, magical touch on. Is there a favorite one? Is there one that sticks out in your mind as being nothing will ever top that, or one that, just for you is like the golden event or the golden project?
I'm super insecure about, that, I always look at it like, I remember when we released the mystery box with JJ, I remember thinking aloud to friends and stuff. I was like, I'm never going to do anything cooler than this. Like, I just like, it's this cool thing and it's with JJ and it's awesome. How do I top this? And I had nothing. I never and still don't have a life plan. I'm still just go with the wind and what sounds exciting and interesting on an hour by hour basis. And then something else comes along. And then you're like, oh, this sounds cool. I want to run with this and let's see where this leads. And then, oh, wait, that's a dead end. That was a terrible, thing. And that project didn't work out or it fizzled. Of course, no one sees, and we're not talking about the failures right now. We're talking about the highlights, but there's tons of projects that get left on the cutting room floor. And those aren't the exciting stories. Every project that we release becomes my favorite project. When we did the Beatles stuff, I'm like, this is great. And this is awesome. And we're working with the Beatles and that, and then Marvel and James Bond, like every single thing we do becomes, my favorite project we've ever done. But I think being willing to go with the wind like that and accepting and kind of like take every project that's in front of your face, you take complete ownership of, and you really try to push it as far as you can, as hard as you can, as fast as you can. And then if something and you need to pivot and a new opportunity comes in front of you, or you need to go in a different way, being open and receptive to things like that has made it so that every project we do becomes my new favorite project. And then we finish it. And then I go into a dark depression of like, what are we going to do next? How are we going to ever top that? That was the coolest thing we've ever done. And then I got to figure out what to do next. So I don't know what's next, but I know what I'm doing today, and I kind of know what I'm doing tomorrow and next week, and what happens after that, we'll see.
Wow. I always find my favorite project is the last one that I did. Whatever I did most recently is my favorite. Okay, well, we're coming towards the end of the podcast, and there's a few rapid fire questions for the end of the podcast. And the first is actually pretty good to go full circle, because you have been recommended on this podcast from this segment called The Endless Chain. So each guest is asked to recommend another guest that would be great for the podcast. There's two catches. One is that you have to be able to put us in contact. And two is we cannot have had them on the podcast already. So does anybody come to mind, and you can, obviously you may not know everyone who we've had, but anybody come to mind who you think would be a great addition to this podcast?
Ooh. I don't have a list in front of me of who you've had on before. How many people have been on this before?
Hundreds.
Okay, so I'm literally.
You can just name a couple of people. You don't have to.
Who did I name so far? Because there's a few different magicians that I named on this. If you haven't had Blake Voigt,
Blake would be great. That would be a great addition to the podcast.
Then I'm gonna go with Blake Voigt, but there's about 50 others I can name after that.
That's awesome. And he called you during this, so easy to put in contact.
Yeah, well, I'll tell him that he rang the phone, so that meant that he's the one I'm going to recommend.
Perfect. The next question is about modern magic. So a lot has changed in the world of this question used to mean something different before the pandemic, but now it's pretty obvious what it means. But a lot has changed in the world of magic in the last 3, 5, 10 years. What's one thing going on in the world of magic right now that you like, and one thing going on in the world of magic right now that you don't like?
One thing I love going on in magic right now is how much the internet has become even more of a vehicle for magicians connecting than it ever has been. Whether that's YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, message boards, anything, you have the ability to connect with other magicians in 15 different forms on a easy, like I'm talking to you right now in a different country, Zoom, Google Meet. You can have a mentor in magic. You can have friends in magic that you could never have had before. I love that I wish that existed, when I was a kid growing up, and everything that I've done since then have been trying to fill that void. So that's one thing I love. One thing I don't like was the second part of the question. Oof. There's not a lot, honestly. Like, there's a very specific genre of magic that I like, and a style of magic. I like pushing magic forward, magic being seen as a sophisticated, upscale, intellectual art form that's still fun and, commercial, but I like elevating the art form. So the things that I like the most, maybe as a positive spin on the question, are like the magicians that do that, I feel like, the most. So, Darren Brown, that we released playing cards with, I feel like is an incredible steward of magic and makes magic seem intellectual and sophisticated and very cerebral. I'm a huge fan. So that's what I would say I like the most. And anything that's the opposite of that is probably what I like the least.
That's good. The next thing is the take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic in many different ways for the last, hour plus. If people are going to think back to this episode and remember one thing to keep with them that maybe will affect them or change what they do, what would that one thing be?
I feel like not everyone listening to this wants to be a professional magician. And I don't mean that as a performing magician. I mean that make magic your career. But for those that are listening to this, that do, especially younger people that might be listening to this, that are me, when I was that age, when I was 13, if you're listening to this and you are that, or if you're someone that's trying to figure out if you can make magic your career, I think the takeaways, at least from my experience, for what it's worth, and this is just my 2 cents, is just being very willing to go where your passion leads you. And you don't have to have a goal. Everyone always talks to me about, like, what's your backup plan? What's your goal? Like, how are you going to make that happen? And I never had any of that, and I still don't. And people ask, like, what's your 5-year plan? Like, I don't have a 5-day plan, let alone a 5-year plan. So it takes, the give and take to that is that you don't have a plan. It means that you're going a little bit more with the wind. It means potentially more insecurity. in your career path, not knowing exactly what you're doing. You have to be totally set on what you're doing in the moment. But I'm just saying, be willing to deviate from your original plan. If I had said to myself in my head that to be successful, you have to be a famous magician, which was my original goal. And if I don't do that, I fail. If I had told myself that story in Darren Brown's book, Happy, he talks about the importance of the stories that you tell yourselves. And he tells a story in the opening part that I don't want to ruin of his book about Andy Nyman and the stories you tell yourself. Don't tell yourself that story. Make your story to yourself, have a choose your own adventure aspect to it where it can change. And that can be chapter 1 of your story, wanting to become a famous magician or performing magic on cruise ships or performing magic virtually or being a magic creator. But you can change your story and you can become something completely different, or you could not be a professional magician and you could go work at something else and magic is your hobby. And that's totally fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't make you lesser of a magician because you don't perform. It's just different. And so I just want to open people's eyes of how many options and opportunities there are in magic and ways that you can have a life in magic that don't necessarily have to involve becoming a famous magician.
I love that. I think that it's kind of a through line that we've talked about a lot through this. And I think for me, the take home point is send that second email. It's okay if you get rejected the first time. Just go cry to the guy in the lobby or whatever. Like, just send the second email. So many of your stories, come from you, not giving up after the first person says no. And my gosh, we're glad you did.
I wish it was the second email. Usually it's like the
10th or the
30th or something. And you have to just have the stomach to bear with that. Obviously, you have to believe in what you're proposing and what you're aiming to do, and have to have that vision and fight for it and protect it. But it's not for everyone I know that has done things, and the people I admire the most. It's a constant, series of setbacks and adversities. And the only thing that they have in common, these are people like that, like Copperfield, that I still idolize. Is that they have a really big stomach for just overcoming that, moving on to the next thing, going on, adapting, changing. And David still does that. And that's why it's super inspiring to see his workflow and how he works and the pace.
There are many people who you've mentioned on this episode who I have been sending emails to incessantly for years to get on the podcast and not giving up. So definitely resonate with that message. The last thing is plugs. Obviously, is a silly question, but where can people find you? Where can people find some of the stuff that we've been talking about, and where can they, go be a part of it and learn a little bit more?
Like, comment, subscribe. So Theory 11 is obviously Theory 11. Mostly, obviously, our website, theory11.com. You can, if you haven't seen The Magician Online, Dan White's show, you can go to themagicianonline.com. Even if you're a magician, you might know how to do some of the tricks. I think we'll fool you at least a few times, but
fool me for sure, no question.
Awesome. Yeah. So even if you don't, though, it's awesome to see magic being done in a totally different way like that, and hopefully you'll have fun watching it. Box One is the game that we made with Neil Patrick Harris. You can go to box1game.com, or you can visit your local Target store, Barnes & Noble store, or Walmart store for that. And our playing cards are also sold at Barnes & Noble if you don't want to order online or wait for shipping. But yeah, we ship internationally too on Theory 11. So for anyone that hasn't seen our stuff, feel free to check it out. But I appreciate the support, and obviously great to chat with you. I love talking about this stuff. I rarely do because I've just been so head down focused on whatever project that we do. So it is refreshing to me to just reminisce a little bit on where I started. So thanks for indulging me on that. And hopefully if one person hears any of this and is inspired to chase something that seems improbable because they're from Charleston, South Carolina and have never met another magician, then great success.
Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. As always, if this was cool, if this was interesting to you, if this taught you something, then one thing you could do to look really smart is share it with some magicians that you know, because when they listen to it, they'll know that you recommended it, and they'll be like, hey, that guy is really smart. So, hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you recommend it to a friend. That's the only way other people hear about this thing. So thanks so much for being here, and I will see you next Thursday. Peace.